Shiona.
Hi everyone, thanks very much Damon, and thanks for asking me to do this. So as Damon said, my name is Shiona Campbell and I own a business called BDS, and we support people to grow their businesses by winning public sector contracts. I set up BDS 3 years ago. Prior to that, I've worked within two of Scotland's largest social care charities. I was within the business development department, and we secured public sector contracts to allow them to grow. One of them turned over £65 million a year and did no fundraising, and the other was about £60 million, £65 million. And the other was about £40 million, but they did about half and half with fundraising and with by securing public sector contracts. So before I did that, I worked within the public sector, not within procurement. I worked for 4 different local authorities, started in Suffolk, moved to Dundee, then Argyll and Bute, and then North Lanarkshire Council. But latterly I was employed on a project that ran across all 32 local authorities in Scotland. So I got to see how they worked, and they're all working very, very differently. And also my team were responsible for trying to pull together joint working arrangements. I started in that team in 2008, and then the financial crash hit. So we were externally funded, and despite being asked to consider 30% cuts to our funding, I managed to grow the team in that time by securing funding elsewhere. So that kind of got me into the whole funding and writing applications side of things. So now with BDS, I work with a range of different businesses. I've worked with brand new businesses. The first one I started working with, they had 2 employees who also owned other businesses, so it was a very part-time thing. And they now employ about 300 people and deliver services across Scotland. So, and I've also worked with solo business owners who are happy being solo business owners but want to find other streams of income, and also businesses who just want to grow. So a range of businesses there. So today we're going to cover 5 of the myths of public sector procurement debunked. Also the first steps in selling to the public sector, and some tips if you're trying to sell to public sector, including my top tip. So we've got some questions that were put in with the bookings. So I've tried to cover them within my presentation, but where I've not, I've put them in. There's a question section at the end, so I've put them in there, and I'll try and make sure that I address them. And Philip's going to capture the questions as well if you want to put them in the chat thread. So to start with, some basics. So some of this is terminology that I'll use going through it, so just so everybody's clear on what I mean by things. So the first one is SME. So by SME, I mean small or medium enterprise. That can go from sole traders up to medium-sized companies, which tend to employ about 250 people. So that tends to be the definition for SMEs. It's used quite a bit in terms of procurement. So the second term is public sector. I've been asked a few times recently exactly what the public sector is. I just presumed everybody knew, but then it makes sense that everybody doesn't know. So the public sector in a nutshell is responsible for providing all public services in the UK. So that's from emergency services to education and social care, to defence, to housing and refuse collection. And it comprises of central government departments, local government departments, and also other organisations that are funded by the public purse. So to us, that means organisations like local councils, the Scottish and Welsh governments, departments of health, Ministry of Defence, and also amongst all that is some arm's length organisations. So in Scotland, that's organisations like the Accountancy and Bankruptcy, the Care Inspectorate, Quality Meat Scotland, British Museum, Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, but this list just goes on and on, it's endless. I could have written a huge list about that, but it just shows you there's lots of different organisations within that, and organisations you might not necessarily have thought of, and also organisations within that that vary in size, which all open up the opportunities to SMEs, the different size of these. So the third was I wanted to talk to you about is what the public sector buy. So the public sector buys everything. Traditionally, they would just have bought goods, really, but in 1980 there was in the 1980s there was a whole push towards them outsourcing things. This happened to varying degrees within different public sector bodies, how much they outsourced and what exactly they outsourced. So there's quite a mishmash in there of what is outsourced services wise. So yeah, it just varies from body to body. But the types of things they buy, so goods wise, like pens, pencils, musical instruments, cleaning material. So then when you look at services, goods, cleaning materials, but then services wise, cleaning services they buy, photography services, health and wellbeing services for children, and also most public bodies will buy a kind of occupational health type service. Major infrastructures like building motorways and schools. They'll also purchase accommodation for people that are homeless. So the list really goes on, and I think there's not many products that people sell, and by products I mean goods, services and works, that the public sector wouldn't buy because just how much they buy. So the last kind of terminology I wanted to talk about was tenders. So tenders are contract opportunities. They're published by the public sector for goods, services and works. It's a process, tendering's a process. So once you understand the process, it's something that you can replicate. As part of the process, they must publish a contract notice which outlines exactly what they want to buy, how you should submit a bid, and also the value of the contract and how long the contract would last. So whether it's a one-off purchase or it's something that's going to go on. So that should all be outlined within the initial tendering part. So today I'm going to talk mostly about the situation in Scotland. And I've got some slides, particularly looking at Dunbartonshire, so East and West Dunbartonshire, and how the councils there buy. If you want to sell in England and Wales, then I'm happy to discuss this over a call if I don't cover it within this. But the whole procedure's the same, whether you're looking in, well, throughout the EU, it's actually the same. So moving on to the myths. So the first myth that I come across when I speak to people and I ask them if they considered selling to the public sector. So the first myth that people often say is that the public sector won't buy from them. Often that's because they're a small business owner or they work on their own and they think they're far too small for the public sector to buy from. So the reality of this is that the government changed the way that it buys products, so goods, services and works, a few years ago. And a lot of these changes were to help solo and small businesses to bid for contracts and to be included within the supply chain. So the first of these is that the public sector, the government actually said that by 2022 they want a third of their spend to be with SMEs. So the spend, its supply chain is it's directly and indirectly, so within the supply chain as well as them buying directly. They also must settle invoices within 30 days. But in Scotland, in fact, in 2017-18, 99% of valid invoices were paid within 10 working days. So this is all a move towards the cash flow being right for smaller businesses to deal with the public sector. And at the moment, due to the COVID-19 situation, the Scottish Government have actually put out a kind of diktat, a notice to all public bodies saying that they should actually be settling invoices as soon as they can, and that's to maintain the cash flow within the small business SME sector. So this is all moving to the fact that they want to be doing business with you. The government wants public sector to be doing things with you. So also they introduced a simpler application process. So in practice, this means that in Scotland, the ESPD, so that's the European Single Procurement Document, so that's a kind of qualification stage, it tends to be pass or fail. So for smaller value contracts, that's one below the EU threshold. I think Philip's going to chuck a link in there to the EU thresholds. So anything below that, they don't need to complete an ESPD. The thresholds are over £100,000. So actually to an SME, that's actually quite a big contract. So if it's going to be a simpler process for you, it's all the better. So for many of you, that would be a good contract, at least to start with the public sector. Also in England and Wales, they've done away with another, it's just a different, quite similar to an ESPD, but it's all just to make it, it's a selection questionnaire, so it's all just to make it simpler. Another way that things have been changed is that larger contracts can be split into smaller parts, so what are called lots, and that creates even more opportunities. So what I mean by lots is that maybe if you had a contract that was covering East Dunbartonshire, say they were putting something out and they wanted to split it geographically, what they could do is a kind of Bishopbriggs, Kirkintilloch and Lenzie side, and then they could have another lot that was Clydebank, no, not Clydebank, that's West Dunbartonshire, but Bearsden and Mulgai, so splitting it like that, which that makes it so the value and what needs to be done is a lot lower, and it makes it a lot more achievable for smaller businesses to do. Another way that they can lot opportunities is by splitting them into specialisms. So if you were maybe looking at a stationery order, for argument's sake, then it could be split into like writing materials for one lot, and you could have a second lot that is maybe like pens, sorry, you could have pens and pencils, and then you could have pads, paper, that kind of split. But a lot, like you can split it down as much as you want. So there's a tender been published this morning by a group of housing associations that have got together. So it's Ferguson Park Housing Association that's the main one for it. And that's for kind of maintenance works, and it's been split into 10 different lots. So you've got like roofing, electrical works, landscaping. So they've split it down those kind of ways. So it means that you can often apply for more than one lot, but you can choose just to apply for the lot that you know about. So I've also seen it split, they lot a lot of contracts. I'm trying to think of relevant ones for people on the call today. So I've seen one for emergency accommodation, and it was Edinburgh City Council, and the way that they allotted it was how many rooms were in a property. I think East Dunbartonshire did that as well when they had theirs out. So it meant that if you only have one property and it's one bedroom, then you just go for that lot. Whereas if you've got a number of different properties with different bedrooms, then you would go for each lot that's relevant to you. So they also increasingly are using what are called frameworks or dynamic purchasing systems. They're both reasonably similar procedures, although there are a few differences between them. So with frameworks, most of the time, but not always, there'll be more than one supplier within a framework. So it's splitting the risk for the public body who's putting the procurement out. They operate in a couple of different ways, but they should normally use them when they don't know how long the requirement's going to last, and they also don't know the value of it. So you see it used quite a lot in social care when they're buying like care at home for people. So they don't know from month to month how many people there's going to be that requirement for, or what kind of care they're going to need. So they put out frameworks for that. And also for that kind of thing, by having a number of suppliers there, they're splitting their risk up. If you give all your care at home services to one supplier and they then go out of business, then you're left with nobody supplying you. So it's splitting the risk for the local, or well, local authority in that case, but public body. And also in Scotland, another way that they've made it easier for solo and small business owners is that all opportunities must be advertised in Public Contracts Scotland. So that's a web portal, and all opportunities must go into that. Everything valued over £50,000 must be advertised publicly. I'll deal with that a wee bit later, the values on it. And in England, any opportunity of over £10,000 must be advertised in Contracts Finder. So depending on where you're wanting to sell, they're good web portals to get familiar with. So in Scotland, there's Public Contract Scotland and another system called PCS Tender, so Public Contract Scotland Tender. All procurements administered through one of those two systems, but all must be advertised in the Public Contract Scotland system. So you should always find your adverts on there. So the second myth I was going to look at was that the lowest price tender will always win. So this is quite a common one. Everybody thinks it's all down to price. But the reality of that is that price can't be the only reason for awarding a contract. So instead they use a terminology like MEET, so the most economically advantageous tender. So what that means is that they'll look at a mixture of price and quality, and each will be scored, so that should be clear within the procurement documentation what the scoring is for each. I've actually seen some that are 100% quality, so they tell you what they'll pay for the service. It was a service in that case, and everything's on the quality. So how you say you're going to deliver the service basically for that. So what it is, if you're when you're bidding, it's really important to be aware of how the split is for that. You don't want to be, if you know that you're not the cheapest in your market, you don't want to be going for something that's evaluated really high on price. If it's something that you're really, really keen to get and it's evaluated high on price, so like maybe 80 or 90%, then you need to go in with a low price to be to have a chance at winning that. So it's really, really important to see that and to understand that. So the third myth is that existing suppliers will always win a contract. So the reality of that is that whilst an existing or incumbent provider should stand a really, really good chance of winning a contract, it's not always the case that it will be re-awarded to them. There's a number of reasons why it might not happen. So you might find that when it's been reviewed prior to going out for procurement, that there's been changes made to it, and it might not suit that supplier to still provide it with the new terms and conditions. I've seen contracts being lotted, whereas previously it would have been one supplier. And the way the lots are done, they might decide not to go for all lots. They might just decide to go for one of them. Also, I recently helped somebody on a tender, and it had an incumbent provider. They went along to a provider's site visit for it, and they got the impression that the buyer wasn't particularly happy with the service that they were receiving. And also when you looked at all the documentation for it, you could see that, well, one of the requirements was that you paid the staff, so it was a service contract, so reliant on staff. You had to pay staff a minimum of the Scottish living wage, and due to it being reliant on staff, there was potential that staff would have to be transferred from the old service to the new service. So we were given details, no personal details, you get given basically how many staff, salaries, holidays, pension contributions, that kind of thing. But from that you could see the hourly rate was lower than the Scottish living wage. And they were a multinational company who supply all over the world, and they're in loads of different sectors, loads of different types of services. And for them to increase the wages of, they couldn't just increase the wages of those staff in that contract. It would have other implications for the business and potentially wouldn't be particularly easy to do. So they immediately wouldn't score particularly high on that element of the tender because we knew that they couldn't deliver it. So there is always opportunity there, but getting to know your market and getting to know how people are performing all helps you inform whether it's something that you would go for with an incumbent provider. So the fourth myth is that I can't engage with buyers during the procurement process. So the reality of this is that you can and you should. There's formal process for contacting the buyer. Normally that would be using the procurement portal, and it's normally a Q&A section, but sometimes it's by email, not that often now, but there is always a process of doing it. It should be clear within the documentation, the cut-off dates for asking questions. But it is something that you should be doing. You should review things, and if there's something you're not sure of, you should ask about it. So you're able to ask about what the contract covers, how the tender will be scored. They can confirm the tender procedure within any questions, what value the contract is over the full life cycle. You can ask about that, and there's other things you can ask about as well. So it's a function that I encourage people to use, and when I'm helping people, I definitely do use it. I would try to review everything early so that I'm asking questions early, and also it gives you a chance to review everything. And I would review, so once you ask a question and it's answered, it should be circulated to everybody, so everybody should see what's been asked. It's anonymised, but you should see it all. So it's really important to look at what else has been asked and make sure that you have a proper understanding of what you're bidding for. So the fifth myth is, once I've completed one tender, I can cut and paste content for future bids. So this is something I've actually discussed with Damon. I've got slightly different views on it, but the reality is that every submission isn't the same. I recently worked on a couple of tenders with an organisation. So each were for associate trainers for a college, different colleges. And both, they were a couple of months apart, both had a question about your understanding of the service that you were going to deliver. So the first one, we felt we'd answered well, and there was a discussion over whether we just cut and paste it into the next response. But the first answer, for tender one, the word limit was in 500 words. And for tender two, the word limit was 1,000 words. So had we cut and paste it from one to the other, there's a really good chance we'd have missed things that the second one was looking for. Also, when you looked at the specification, so the specification's what they're looking for to get to be delivered. There was very little information in the first in tender one, and there was a lot more in the second. So there was a lot we could elaborate on. Having the word limit there, the additional word limit, meant that we definitely could do that. So I feel that we really could have missed out if we just cut and paste it. But what I would say is you can build a bid library or a tender library. People have slightly different expressions for it, and it can contain common information that you need. But I would say you have to tailor every response, because it's likely that different public bodies will be working to slightly different end goals, and have slightly different reasoning for things. And also when you start to if you're looking through the Q&A and if things are asked, you get more of a feel for things that are important to them, which are things that you then want to bring out within your bid. So I don't know if anybody's got any questions up till now. There's none in the chat, no. Right, I'll move on then. Right, so now we've looked at that, and hopefully I've persuaded you that selling to the public sector is a good thing and something that you should at least be considering as an organisation. So we'll look at the first steps. So the first thing I would advise you to do, if you're based in Scotland, you want to sell, I'm assuming in Scotland, is to register in the Public Contract Scotland web portal. Within that, you'll be able to complete two different profiles. So the first is an alert profile. The alert profile is set up, and it'll mean that you get, whenever there's tenders published that meet your criteria, then you should get an email about it. Normally the emails are sent at night, so you get that through that one's been published that day. And then there's a more important part to it, is a supplier finder profile. So you need to complete your supplier finder profile, make sure it's set to publish. The supplier finder profile can be used by buyers to find somebody that sells whatever they're looking to buy, and they can then invite them to bid for things. There are limits, like thresholds, and there are limits within different public bodies as to how they can buy things. And you tend to find in most Scottish public bodies between £16,500 and £15,000 contract value. They can invite people through quick quotes to bid for that work. And what they would then do is, if they're inviting somebody to bid for a quick quote, is they look on the supplier finder profiles, they look in the supplier finder section. So if you're not on that, then you can't be invited to it. For most small businesses, a contract up to even £16,500 would be very welcome, particularly at the moment. So it's really something that there's not many people I wouldn't advise to do this if they want to sell in Scotland. So once you've done that, what you also want to think about is your strategy, and how your whole growth strategy within your organisation, and how public sector procurement can support that. And what the two areas I'd look at within that are geographical area and product area. So what products you want to supply, and are you wanting to add things to that, new products, or is there products you don't want to be supplying anymore? And by products, again, I do mean goods, services and work. So whatever you sell is a product, even if it's a service. Oh yeah, what I didn't say about the supplier finder profile is that you need to definitely set it to publish. And in Scotland, about 77% of opportunities aren't actually advertised that anybody can apply for. They're done through the quick quote system. So by not being quick quotes, that's a huge percentage of things you might not know about. I deliver on behalf of one local authority procurement support, and I was asked to work with businesses. They were given like an hour's surgery, and it was reviewing the quick quote because their procurement section said it wasn't clear within the supplier finder profile where the businesses were based, which we'll go into that in a minute, why that's important. So the quick quotes are normally lower value contracts, but £50,000 isn't really a particularly low value contract. Depending on the value of contracts you're going for, another kind of first step could be to complete an ESPD, so that's European Single Procurement Document, which will become a single procurement document after we've formally left the EU. The majority of that's done on a kind of pass-fail basis, so that's a qualification document, so it'll have details about your company, about have you committed a number of different offences, and then there's one section at the end that's sometimes scored, and it's examples of different contracts that you've delivered that are similar. So that's the one section within the ESPD that you'd want to tweak for different contracts that you're going for. But that's something else you can also look at doing. So right, I mentioned that standing orders. So standing orders, every public body must have standing orders, and that tells them how they must approach different size contracts. So for contracts, like I said, between £16,500 and £50,000 in Scotland, they'll mostly use quick quotes. So this is very common across all, but some do vary. So if there's a particular public body you're interested in, then I would look at their standing orders, and I would just, if you Google that, you can normally find it. Right, so these standing orders are taken from Dunbartonshire. So they must obtain at least 4 competitive quotes if they're using quick quotes. As a minimum, when they send invites out, they must invite 2 SMEs whose principal place of business is within East Dunbartonshire. So that's where the local part comes in. You need to be clear within your profile where you're from, so that when they're looking to tick this box, then they can find you and it's really clear and you're not making it difficult for them. They also must invite a new supplier that they've never used before, and a supported business where they can. So supported businesses tend to employ disabled people and have a certain percentage of their workforce would be disabled in some way. And then for contracts under £16,500, it's recommended that they obtain 4 quotes. So again, they must invite an SME whose principal place of business is within the local authority, a supported business and a new supplier. So the supplier finder, even though they're not administering it through Public Contract Scotland, it's an easy way for them to find even under £16,500 in value. So what would happen is, if you've got your supplier finder profile set up and they're looking for somebody, is it would all be administered through the system. So you get an email saying you've been invited to bid for this, you can go in and review it, and then you choose from that whether you want to bid for it or not. So looking at the stats here for East Dunbartonshire, I'm not sure if you can all see them properly. So within this, you can see that in the last 6 months, I've got it too low on my screen. Oh, sorry, I'm thinking out. I think it's right. So they've done like the quick quotes distributed. The first one's the important one. So that's how many quick quotes they've put out. And when you put that against how many notices, so this is the notices are the open ones for everybody. They're advertised publicly. So there's actually quite a high proportion are done through the quick quote system, which is why it's really, really important to do that. And when you look at West Dunbartonshire, it gets even more important to do it. So they had, sorry, I'm just writing down the notes before I change this into the other screen. So 25, right. So in West Dunbartonshire, they put out 25 quick quotes in the last 6 months, and they've only done 11 like public procurement. So they're definitely doing way more on the quick quotes route than they are on the like publicly advertised stuff. So quick quotes are such a way to go. Supplier finder profile. So has anybody got any questions about that? Oh, Lillian, wait a minute. Yeah, Lillian.
Am I right in thinking that you can't see what you've got about yourself for the quick quotes? Yes. Or what they're looking for? Are the quick quotes advertised anywhere?
No, they're not advertised, and that's why you need the supplier finder profile. So you can see your own supplier finder profile, but you can't see anybody else's. And you also can only see the quick quotes if you're invited to it. That's the only way you would see it.
Right. Okay, thanks.
So, anybody else? Right. So moving on to some tips for tendering. I kind of touched on the first one already. It's really important to understand what you're capable of providing. So understanding what your strengths as a business are. So what you're already delivering, what you can like provide examples of delivering, all come into that. What your weaknesses are, and if you don't know your weaknesses, then you then can't address them. So it's really important to understand that. Also being aware, so both for the strengths and weaknesses, how you can fill the gaps within that, and also being clear of your overall business strategy and where procurement fits into that. I often see people who just bid for anything. Often I'll hear from people because they've seen this opportunity, and it can be really difficult to respond to something, be really responsive like that and do it well. You can do it so much better if you've planned for it and you know what you can offer, you know where your limits are with things, and then you can evaluate potential tenders within that, and you have a much better idea quicker of what you can and can't deliver, so you're not wasting time doing things that you know you can't do. Also, within pricing of your product, understanding the evaluation criteria is important within that. So if you're not clear on how something's going to be evaluated, then it's difficult to price accordingly. So like I was saying before, if something's, you'll price, well, to me, you would do a completely different price for something that's going to be evaluated 80% on price, 20% on quality, as opposed to the next tender that comes along and it's 50-50 split. Because there's so much more in the 80-20, so much more prominence in that price that comes in, so much more important in it all. So understanding that criteria is really important. I've not put it in it within the quality section of the evaluation. It's also important to understand that. So it should tell you the different questions and how much scoring is given to each. So if you've got a question that's worth 20% within your quality evaluation and another that's worth 80%, then really you should be spending the time on the 80% part rather than the 20%. You should put a lot more time into the 80% than the 20%. And often you find people are working in very different parts of that, just because they don't really get the criteria. Also within the pricing, going back to that, be really clear on where you can add value. So what differentiates your product to other people's products? Maybe you can deliver a lot quicker, which could be really, really important to a buyer. Maybe your product will last a lot longer. Maybe you've got a product that is really good for the environment. So if you look, I know that somebody on the call does have a cleaning product that doesn't have loads of chemicals in it. Well, if you've got a buyer whose environmental impact is really high on their agenda, then telling them about that really would help to add value for your product. And also think what's important to the buyer, so part of that comes into that. If you're bidding to an environmental agency, then the chances are environment's really important to them. So the types of that with the cleaning would come into it. And also just having a bit of a look round about what they've been publishing recently. So if you look at like schools, all schools in Scotland have been given money to close the attainment gap. So if you know, like, and so attainment comes with health and wellbeing, literacy and numeracy. But if you know you've got some product that really helps with the literacy of children and you're trying to sell to schools, then that's such a good thing because they're reporting to Scottish Government on that. So yeah, it's something they'll seize upon and you're likely to score higher and whatnot. So also think wider than the public sector. You might find that at the moment, if we were to go in and do a quick look, that the public sector aren't really buying what you're selling, or you've maybe got a particular buyer in mind and they've actually just done their procurement process. So you'd have to wait another 3 or 5 years. And there's just this one buyer that you're interested. But what you could do is you could look to whoever's supplying them and see if you could potentially, whoever won that contract, could you supply them instead of supplying the public sector directly. So I've worked with somebody who's a business coach interested in working with one of the larger public sector organisations in Scotland. And we looked and we had a look at different contracts that would be relevant for them, and there was a couple that they'd missed, and then when we looked at a few more, they maybe weren't quite ready at the moment for doing that. So what we did is we looked at who was supplying, who was already delivering those contracts, and they approached them, and they've actually ended up with work through that. So it means that they're all the time building towards being able to deliver on their own as the main supplier, but they're still securing work at the moment and getting loads of experience and also getting known by that public sector body because they're in and amongst it all. So also, so whenever you're tendering, make use of the clarification function. So I mentioned this before. The Q&A is amazing. I look through stuff and then I'll start asking questions, and I'll also really look at what other people are asking. So it's quite interesting to see when people take a slightly different take on things than you do, but it's really good to just get clear on whatever you think has been asked for, because it could be that they've not quite, within their document it's not quite what they think is in that, because if you work on something long enough it reads what you want it to read. So that could be the case, or it could also be you're just not sure if you could deliver, like, this is the product, if your product quite fits within that. So you can ask some questions around about that and get things clear in your mind. But within the clarification, make sure that you're clear on the deadline for it and that you ask questions before that deadline and that you regularly review. So you'll get through the portals, you'll get an email every time a question's asked and answered. Well, an answer's given, sorry. And you can then go and look at it, and that might actually raise other questions for you. So, and also look for opportunities for frameworks in dynamic purchasing systems. Sorry, DPS is dynamic purchasing systems. They're just such good opportunities for solo and small business owners to really get to grips with what's been asked for. With their type of service, sort of splitting things down and being big enough to be able to deliver portions of that. Dynamic purchasing systems. So a framework will be advertised and there'll be a deadline. So normally the deadline's about a month from when it started advertising. And normally framework agreements would last about 3 to 5 years. dynamic purchasing systems last about the same amount of time, but they'll be open the whole time, so you can apply to join them at any point in it. Scottish Government have quite a few around about the technical services. They've got one, Internet of Things. They've got a few different ones, so people can apply at any time at all for them. You really are going through the first part of the procurement process, so it's all a kind of pass-fail. They have no limit to how many people can be on it, and what happens is whenever they have work they want delivered, they'll then put that out to a mini competition, so everybody who's on that particular part of it would get invited to bid at that point. So loads of opportunity within dynamic purchasing systems. There's also not the same requirements within dynamic purchasing systems to deliver, so you can turn work down easier. Sometimes in frameworks it's more difficult to turn things down, but DPSs there isn't that, and also you don't put the price in until you're putting your kind of final bid, your mini competition in, so that's a really good opportunity as well. Just seeing, sorry, I've got a few notes. Oh yeah, so the last thing with the kind of tips for tendering is don't necessarily look for just one public body, or like, so if you thought, oh, councils, I could deliver to them, there's also some collaborative buying goes on. So for councils in Scotland, sometimes goods and services are purchased by Scotland Excel, so they do the framework agreements for them, of the agreements. So Scotland, so they buy on behalf of all 32 local authorities. APUC, so that's Advanced Procurement for Universities and Colleges, so they'll often do agreements for colleges and universities throughout Scotland. There's also Scottish Government have a number of different collaborative procurements out, and also Crown Commercial Services, so that's more of a kind of UK basis. But yeah, so there's opportunities within the different collaborative agreements. Often Scotland Excel would split, so normally it'll be a framework, normally it would be lotted. So some are on a more geographic basis, but you always get a kind of specialism lots within it as well. So lots of opportunity there. So has anybody got any questions for that? No, right. Which brings you on to my top tip. So my top tip is round about this supplier finder profile, because it's such an opportunity. So if I was you, I'd be completing and publishing a supplier finder profile. Yeah, just loads of opportunity with that. Within it, yeah, as I said before, be clear about where you're based, the product or products that you're selling, any memberships or accreditations that you have, and what makes you stand out from your competitors. So that's really important to think of. Yeah, so with the whole procurement thing, a lot of people are put off because it just seems complex and complicated, but it's a system, a process. So once you understand the process, then it's simpler to have an internal process for dealing with it and for responding just to different opportunities. So part of that would be like getting together your kind of tender or bid library, and making sure that you've got a process for reviewing things. So what I would say is, like, only have one person within, one email within the organisation signed up to Public Contract Scotland, so that you're clear on which email that's going to, who's got responsibility for checking that daily, and who then would have a look through any opportunities and making sure they're clear on it, whether it be a quick quote that's come through or it be a like open tender that's come through. It needs to be reviewed against what you want to achieve and being clear of whether it's a good opportunity for you or not. So yeah, be clear on all them. And at the moment, so within like the kind of current environment, there's not as many tenders being published at the moment, but there are still opportunities out there. What I'm seeing with some is that the deadline's been extended. So the one for Fergusley Park that I mentioned, they're really clear that their deadline at the moment, I think, is the 1st of June, but it's likely that that's going to change depending, because they want to get everybody together for a supplier session. So they know that they might have to do it remotely, but I think their ideal would be to get everybody in a room together. So they won't know the final deadline for submissions until they're clear on that. But that, it shows you there are still opportunities out there. So now's quite a good time to be kind of upskilling and learning as an organisation, and this is an opportunity to do that and get things in place so that you can, as an organisation, be responding to opportunities as and when they arise. So I whizzed through that. So, but what I was going to say, there was a couple of questions beforehand, so hopefully I've covered some of them within this. But Robert had asked about the changes after we leave the EU and what will replace it.
Yes.
Yeah, so my understanding of it is that the regulations on procurement come from the EU, and all because of the single market, anybody within the EU should be able to bid for contracts. So like in Scotland, the first part of our process would be the European Single Procurement Document. My understanding is that we rename that Single Procurement Document, so to me that means that not much is going to change. It'll be harder to bid for things out with the UK, but I don't think there'll be huge changes apart from that. Does that kind of answer that?
Yeah. Can I come in, Shiona?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Robert Wilson here. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Scotland is the only country that ever fully implemented the full procedure of procurement. Nobody else done.
Yeah.
Spain hardly done it at all. So that's Scotland went further than they needed to go, which is fine. I take on board exactly what you're saying. But are you aware that there's a committee sitting in Parliament just now who are looking at the failings of the procurement system in Scotland?
Right. So they're going to change. Well,
they're looking to change certain aspects.
Yeah.
I'm a member of an organisation called Scottish Building.
Right.
One of our members is a past president of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, and he's been invited on, and they're calling it the failings of.
Yeah.
There's not an awful lot wrong with it. It's just that what's happened in the past. I'll give you an example for me. There was a contract came out about 9 years ago up in Shetland, and the company Miller won the work, and they never worked on the island before because there was other companies within Shetland who had bid for it and were unsuccessful because of prices to build a health centre. And what they ended up doing, Miller won the contract, then they couldn't get anybody, but no, Ireland being a small island, Shetland being a small island, there was nowhere for them to live on the island. So they ended up walking away from the contract. And this is one of the things that's saying, trying to keep it as local as you can. I think at that time, Miller employed 50 people in the whole of Scotland. There's the most in that. So the procurement procedures are good in very, very, very ways. And while I've got the floor, if you don't mind, there's a couple of comments. Another wee example we had was that at 43 years in business, I've always looked at a contract and I've always looked to see what's left out, not what's in. Because quite often, and the way the councillors are now, they do not have the expertise they once had for the quantity surveyors and these kind of people. And I give you an example of that was one of my competitors, although I consider them to be friends. The last time that Central Station was painted in Glasgow, they won it and they were £1 million cheaper than the next competitor. They went to start the job, didn't mention a thing about it. Once they started the job, they then said there's nothing in here for working at height, and they ended up getting 1.6 million additional costs because it had been missed out for working at height. So sometimes there's a wee tip, and your tips are very good. I've taken a photograph of them. But sometimes the tips, you look at what's not in the contract.
Yeah.
And that way you can do it. And two other things, if I may, and I'll be quiet. By far, the best organisation to deal with regarding contracts and procurement is the Scottish Prison Service. They're by far and above the best I've ever dealt with. But still, we continue with them. And another wee tip, I'm sort of on the way out. I've only got 8 guys now, so I'm trying to retire a bit. Although the way this is going, I'm not really enjoying doing nothing. But one of the things I would advise anybody to do is, for about 20 years, I was a member of the SFHA, which is the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations. And as an associate member, you get invited along, you go to all their meetings and all their conferences, etc. And that's the best way to make contacts, especially in the bar at night. It used to cost me fortunes to go to their meetings, but it was a good way. And I ended up maybe working for maybe 15 or 20 different housing associations throughout the last 20 odd years. the SFHA are very good, and they're very supportive as much as they can be in getting as local as they can. So that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
The local thing is difficult because, well, the procurement regulations say that they must be open throughout the EU because of the single market and everything, so that is difficult. But I agree with being clear, like looking at what's not in the contract. But I would encourage people to use a clarification function on that. So if you're looking at something, you know that working from height must be included in it, and it's not, then I would actually be asking about that to make sure that it's operating in a equal footing. But there's nothing worse than you losing out in a contract when you've priced it accordingly, knowing what's involved, and then somebody doesn't, and they end up with extra money out of it. It's not.
Yes, I know, but this is the way a lot of the, shall I say, your Carolians of this world who are no longer with us. But that's the way we worked for Western Scotland Housing for many years. Carolian came in and got all the work, and the only way we would then get work through Western Scotland Housing is we went to work for Carolian.
Yeah.
And no way would I ever work for anyone like that, and that's part of the problem, you know. But I think housing associations could do a bit more to keep it as local as they can. That can come down to being, you know, taking on apprentices. If you're pricing a job and you're for 4 years or 5 years for a framework agreement, and you guarantee to take someone on each year from a housing associate from the local area, that's. I mean, we worked for North Glasgow Housing for about 20 years. And every 4 years we take on an apprentice from Springburn area, and that was a big plus. It's not. You're absolutely right to say it's not all down to price. It's never should not be down to price. No. They worked it. I think it was 60% price, 40% other qualifications. You know. Yeah. So, but if you take on someone local, that should be a big advantage to anyone.
Well, what they're including more in contracts now is what's called community benefits.
Yes.
And sometimes they're scored, and you're right, the apprenticeship comes right into that. And it scores quite highly in it.
Yeah, it does, very much so, yeah. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Excuse me, there's a question from Adette.
Uh-huh. Hiya.
Hello.
Hi.
Sorry, I can't remember what my question was. It was a while back. I'm still trying to figure out how to navigate this.
Oh.
It's very informative. Thank you.
Oh, no, that's okay. No problem.
I had one, Shiona, actually, which was obviously sort of the move is, I think it has changed a lot, even in the last, 2-3 years, I think, in terms of some of the things that you've been speaking about. And the procurement and tendering changing to respond better to businesses, and the size of business. That SME thing seems much more recent, that than I remember when I was more involved in the tenders. But so that's a real positive for me, that smaller businesses are now being, because they make up something like 90% of the sort of economy. So it's strange they couldn't. But I thought, just wondered if you could say a little bit about sort of collaborative bids, sort of thing.
Oh, right.
I thought that would be an interesting.
Others. Yeah. The public sector likes collaboration. So as well as them collaborating and putting bids, like putting opportunities out together, they also like bids where people are bidding together. I'm trying to think of, there's lots of opportunity for that. So I've seen it when I worked for one of the charities, but it kind of backfired slightly because they collaborated with somebody who also collaborated with somebody else. So they went along for an interview, and this company were in with at least 2 of them, which was just such a weird thing to do. So for that, I would be clear on who I was collaborating with and make sure that there was no conflict between you, and be really clear on what the different parts. But it could mean that you could go for a bigger bid.
It's also smaller businesses with different skill sets.
Yeah, so you could look at, like, so say this one for Spergisley Park wasn't lotted, then you could look at maybe a painter going in with a builder and collaborating together to do the whole project. So it does give you access to bigger contracts as well. So.
And I guess there's quite often a tendency to think about sort of trades and what have you, and is it? But I guess it's maybe the collaborative's more sort of relevant for, I'm thinking about a recent one that we were asked to go in on. So it was market research, it was marketing, it was community engagement, it was statistics. So there was town planning. So there's very specific areas that actually even bigger businesses would probably struggle to have all those skills. So that one brought about 5 kind of small businesses together.
Mm-hmm. There was another question earlier, like from within the registration, you could ask for things you wanted covered. So I don't know if Brian's on, but he'd asked about tips for not-for-profits, supporting services to the vulnerable. In Scotland, again, I'd recommend for that registering on Public Contract Scotland with a supplier finder profile. But I think Brian's actually from England, so in England I'd check how the organisations might fund whatever you're wanting to sell to them, and just be clear on where they're advertising opportunities. But I think for a not-for-profit, potentially looking for grant funding to kind of prove your concept might be a way to go, and showing it works and showing that you're going to deliver well, and then going from there. But the funding's completely different for not-for-profits than for profits. So.
Right, excellent. So have we got any more sort of questions that people are wanting to sort of ask before we sort of wrap up at all? You can either put your hand up sort of physically, or there's a chat.
I think Lillian's wanting to come in.
Yeah.
Hello. You see this quick quotes?
Yeah.
As architects, we'll do lots of different sectors. So we might do housing, we might do healthcare, might do churches. If they're only looking for one thing, supposing they were looking for housing and you've actually got other stuff, how is there any way of filtering it so that you can tailor what you say more to what the buyer is?
Oh, so trying to cover lots of sectors.
But they wouldn't want to read through lots of information. So is there any way of filtering? So if they're looking for housing, I suppose, would they use maybe keywords or something like that?
So within your supplier finder profile, you can have 6 keywords, and then you can have a narrative. The narrative's like 3,000 or 4,000 characters, I think.
Okay.
So I would just hone your keywords. So your keywords are going to be around about architecture and your conservation as well for you, Lillian.
Yeah.
We're actually, Shiona and I have been discussing maybe a follow-up session to this, which would maybe start to look at some, how you might sort of prepare your profile and company library as well.
That's
So
the potential of what we
these
can
are sort
do.
of details that.
Yeah, sorry. That's potentially one of the things we could do is look at holding a session where we could support you to complete your supplier finder profile, actually doing it then and there. Because it's one of these things that just drop off. If people don't do it then and there, then it just goes. The other thing I've got is I think Phil's got the link for it, is I've got a document that you can fill in that helps you think of the different parts of the supplier finder profile that you'd want to address, and then you could just cut and paste it over to your supplier finder profile. So there's a link, I think there's a link there. You're welcome to download that and see about using it. And also, I'm quite happy to have a chat with anybody if they want to talk through any of this. And what I tend to do is on the Zoom is I would just share my screen with people and talk them through the potential opportunities that are there for them. And also we could look at the supplier finder profile if that would be useful. Okay. And then as well as that, I've got a free Facebook group where on a Monday, I look at a different tender every week, and I do it in a Facebook Live. So I'll do what's called a spotlight on. So we look at a different opportunity that's been released the week before, and also looking at why that's achievable for solo and small business owners to win that. And then on a Wednesday, I'll do a teach just round about some of what's been covered today, but just maybe 10 or 15 minutes. So if you want, anybody's welcome to join that.
Great. No, that's ideal, and we'll try and put some of this resource onto the Chamber Hub, because I think you know, as when I talk about the emerging economy and things changing, then you know, this would be a good wee section to have people and start to signpost them.
That's maybe what I've not said, is I think that there's going to be additional opportunity with the public sector as we come out of or get more into the new normal. There's going to be money ploughed in to try and get the economy going again. So there's going to be additional opportunity. And my understanding is that for bids that are out at the moment, they're not getting the number of responses that they normally would. So now it's a good time to be looking at things.
A question from Jason, Shiona.
Yeah.
Hi Shiona, how are you doing?
Hiya.
Thanks very much for this session. It's been invaluable. I really appreciate it. Could I have a follow-up conversation with you? It's around providing voice, mobile and data services to public sector and looking at pre-qualification criteria. So there'll be some assessment criteria that we might not meet right now, but we could partner with other organisations that deliver that. But I need to have a chat really, and I don't think it's probably suitable right here. But could we have a quick follow-up conversation afterwards?
I don't mind having a follow-up with anybody, and part of that, what I would do is look at opportunities, and as part of that, you then look at what the criteria would be. So yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
Thanks, Jason.
Okay.
Fantastic. So, well, unless there's any more for any more, I'll start to round up. Any more that want to jump in at this point? No. So, firstly, thank you, Shiona, for an excellent introduction to the value and potential of this area. I think it really is very obvious. Well, it's maybe not obvious, but you know, hearing from you, it's a very obvious area that businesses could be looking at when they're coming out of this period as a new potential if it's done correctly. I made a couple of notes about it as well, which because I've had some experience as well on the sort of being involved in tenders, and I certainly think that having someone who has experience in this will set. I was having a conversation with Shiona before, so it would save you a whole heap of pain and resource, because I think the other way that businesses sometimes develop their skills is by hammering away at tendering until they finally and going through a number of failed tenders until they can kind of hone it, or actually more often than not they give up, because I know from experience it might take you the best part of a week to put a decent tender together, and once you've got to tender for and not got anything, you're starting to look at the cost benefit analysis. So there's two things. This is Shiona's expertise in an area, and please do, if you're thinking about pursuing this, then consider sort of working with Shiona to get you started. I would cover my comments about the cut and paste. That wasn't really, I didn't really mean sort of cut and paste. It was more that once you build I think it was probably more your library idea, that through experience, when you start to build your library, you can draw different parts from it, and then it's like anything. It's like going for a job. You'd never send the same, covering letter to an employer. You'd always adapt it. So I guess it's taking the bones of that and knowing what your strengths are and adapting it, which is probably more what I meant by. And again, if you get a good start with Shiona, who's helped quite a number of our chamber members to get a foot on the ladder with public sector tendering, then it will become, you have got the framework for that to take it forward. So that's one thing I would say. It also helps you with your judgment. As I said, there's a lot of resource goes into tendering, and I think young businesses in particular tend to go for every single, the sort of kids in the sweet shop type thing, and as you develop your skills and you can match the opportunities to your strengths, I think, and it saves quite a lot of time that way as well. I also wanted to pick up on the community benefit thing, because that's something that I've heard about coming more and more into the fore. We've a lot of our chamber champions use there's a lot of our members that we call chamber champions, or the experts that support us, use that as part of their sort of tendering processes, because it's part of putting something back. So that's becoming more and more important. It's included in lots more tenders, and so just going back to the changing nature and how it's being adapted over time to respond to changing needs. And just going back, it will probably change again after this as well, I would say. More opportunities you were talking about, but maybe there will be skills for remote working and opportunities to put in bids that are going to involve remote working, particularly, if it's not a physical thing, and you're looking at working on an island. I'm just thinking about that example. There's no reason why you couldn't, do the same job as someone who was there physically, sort of thing, if it was a consultancy-based role, for instance. So yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity. I can't remember, what did you give us the total value of the Scottish?
Oh, do you know, I forgot to look at. I've got the details are on my website, actually.
It's absolutely huge. So the actual value of these public sector opportunities is absolutely immense. So I would encourage you, if you can, find a route for your business to get into it. It's a really good mix for your business to get a good bit of income out of it. So I think that was it. The only one, the last thing I wanted to mention was we worked together on we did a wee bid for a grounds maintenance in our area to try and generate some interest from local businesses, actually, for one of our members. And and it made us think that there's, thinking about the chamber membership, so the paid for membership has huge benefits as well, which I should really give a plug to. So there's a lot of things that come into tendering, whether it's policies, from everything from equal ops to health and safety, and through chamber paid membership you get hundreds of online templates and documents for these kind of areas, as well as I think sort of HR, and I think we've got legal, HR, and tax. Well, tax isn't as relevant for this, but legal and HR helplines that you can get access to, as well as all the documents that can really just be sort of downloaded directly into a tender sort of thing. So that was one of the things that was highlighted as being. We actually got a couple of members out of running that session, because a lot of the smaller businesses don't have those in their library already. So I think that's it.
Damon, on that membership, you don't actually have to be based in Dunbartonshire. You just have to work or provide services within the county area to be a member of this Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you very much for that, Paul. And actually, you don't have to have anything to do with the area at all. Actually, it's we've got members from, I think, Arbroath down to Ayrshire, and some of them just joined to get those benefits because we're cheaper than their local chambers. So no, that's a very good point as well. You don't need to be based in Dunbartonshire to engage and get the benefits. So no, that's really good. So finally, I guess, just to thank everyone for joining in, to thank Shiona again for an excellent presentation. We have a few of our other Together for Business champions here. Jason George has from Columbus has been providing IT support, and Marianne and Paul from We Achieve and King Smith as well have been providing support. So it's fantastic to have these champions come together, and some of the unsung heroes, because getting us out of this and paying for the health going forward is going to come from business. So helping businesses through this, Shiona, is absolutely vital in many ways. So thank you very much. Please do connect with the chamber if you do follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you can use we're doing this for the greater good, but if you can do anything, if you could share follow the Together for Business hashtag on LinkedIn and use it on Twitter. That would be really much appreciated as we build this and take a legacy from this situation going forward. And then I think finally, like a few of you have given us the hand clap. So either sort of if you can do your reaction at the bottom of the screen, if we could do a virtual reaction for Shiona there, just to say thank you very much for that, or a physical one.
Thank you.
I was just going to add there, Damon, that if you have put your contact details in the chat function, feel free to, if you want to connect with other people that are on the call, put your contact details in, and then remember to save the chat so that you've got those details saved so that you can use them.
Perfect. And then just finally, before we finish, we try and capture our sessions for so that we can advertise the next lot and the benefits of these. So I could maybe get everyone to kind of put their thumbs up and look handsome and pretty for the last section here. I'll get Philip to take a picture after 3. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Done. Fantastic. Okay, thank you all so much for coming, and please stay connected and come back and see us on one of our other events. Thanks.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks, Shiona. Thanks again.
Thanks, Shiona.
Brilliant, Shiona. Thanks very much. See you later. See you tomorrow.
There you go.